So our panelists today are Hannah Brotherton, CS Ops and Strategy for Spekit, and Selenia McKenzie, Senior Product Manager for Data and Insights. And we are, for the first time, hosting two guests from the same company, and we're doing this very intentionally. We're hosting these guests to understand how data teams and CS teams collaborate, where there's tension, where there's opportunity, and how does the whole process work. And the reason we're doing it this way is we feel like there's an opportunity in the market to create more collaboration and better data-driven processes in the CS organization. And we had an opportunity to connect with Hannah and Selenia a few weeks back and just absolutely loved the conversation and what we took away from that discussion. So I wanted to share that with everybody today. So enough about me, enough about Immersa, enough about the show. Let's go to our guests. How about, Hannah, we start with you. Maybe if you could share your introduction and what you do at Spekit.
Yeah, so my name is Hannah Brotherton, and I am our CS Ops Manager at Spekit. And so I basically get the opportunity to work with all of our CS leadership team and cross-departmentally to make sure that we have really intuitive and thoughtful systems that drive customer outcomes. So my whole goal is making sure we have this really gorgeous, smooth customer journey that makes people smile and really feel attached and love our product.
Right. And Hannah, you're a guitar player?
I'm not, but I'm cool. And
yes,
you are in the background. So that is awesome. No, my partner plays guitar and I listen quietly because I'm also a really horrible singer. So
awesome. And Selenia, how about you, if you don't mind going next, share a little bit about yourself and your role at Spekit.
Absolutely. I can confirm that Hannah is cool. Just want to clear the room on that one.
We're both.
I'm the Senior Product Manager for Data and Insights at Spekit. And because we are a startup, I see everything from how we ingest data, our data warehouse, to how we transform it, to the actual end result of how are users going to use this data, or in this case, how are internal users like Hannah and her team going to use data. So I've been at Spekit for a little bit of 2 years, so I've really seen it go from nothing as far as data to now we have access to everything. And so it's just been a really fun journey.
Awesome. And for folks who are not familiar with Spekit, would you mind sharing a quick introduction to what the company does? Anything about the origin story of how long it's been around and what kind of customers you serve?
I feel like Hannah has a better crafted answer for this because she does this every day.
Yeah, go for it.
So for us at Spekit, we are basically a just-in-time learning platform. So we are going to help your employees show up in the flow of their day and make sure that they have the resources and knowledge they need in order to be super successful in their roles. And so I started about a little over a year ago, and we were started by two incredible women, Melanie and Zari, and they saw a big gap in the market of there's a lot of different ways to learn, but a lot of that doesn't meet you where you actually are with the answers that you need that moment. So they've been crafting and working through this vision for, I think, the last 4 years or so. And so, yeah, we're really kind of understanding who we are and maturing as a company and really kind of working into that product market fit and making sure that we can really serve our customers in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, and I want to add a little context to that too, because I think it'll help frame the conversations we have following this. How we do that is through a web channel, like an actual website you can go to, and a Chrome extension. And so depending on the user and the industry and even segment that they're in, they use our product very differently. And so you'll notice that theme come up as Hannah and I talk throughout the rest of the conversation.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. I know a few more people have joined since we started. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat session and I will raise it to our guests today. If you'd like to participate and directly ask the question, raise your hand and we'll invite you into the conversation. And do share with us which company you're joining from and which city you're joining from. So we have a little bit more context for who our guests are. This is meant to be a ask me anything type of forum. And I will ask a few questions, of course, but we encourage all of our participants to ask questions as we go. All right, so I've talked with both of you a few weeks back. We had a great exchange, and what I took away from that discussion, just completely struck by it, was sort of the data-driven culture that Spekit brings forward. And I would love to understand how, like, what drives that? How did that originate in the company? And it's unique and it's different from most other CS organizations that we talk to. They tend to be more relationship driven, and not that you're not, but like you are definitely a data-driven organization. So tell us a bit more about that and how that came about.
I can take it from kind of that CS perspective. And I would say, so starting a little over a year ago when I first started, we didn't have a lot of data. Like, we had a lot of questions. And I had a lot of questions when I first started, but we didn't have a ton of data. And so that's kind of been this evolution that Selenia and I have partnered a lot on. And I would say the reason that we're so data focused is that I think just as a group of humans trying to solve these problems that we're trying to solve, we're all really genuinely curious. And so to me, like, curiosity is the food for data. And it really helps us be able to understand and answer questions or open up doors to new questions that we might have. So it's definitely been one of those experiences where I think curiosity and just like our general kind of like basis of curiosity has made us really data centric, because we want to have answers to these questions and we want to continue to answer them, and we want to continue to kind of move in this direction.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I also think we make the space for that. I have worked at a lot of companies where they claim they're data driven, or heard of companies, but then they don't listen to the data. And I think our company as a whole, including like our exec and senior leadership team, when we come to them and we're like, hey, we noticed this trend, it isn't shut down as, oh, but we believe that this is going to happen. It's more met with curiosity of, tell us more about that. Like, how did you get to that? Did you consider this other angle? And ironically, that's how Hannah and I meet each other. That's how, whenever one of us comes with an idea or an observation, it's okay, how can we talk through that? And I think, like Hannah said, that curiosity is really what drives that all around, but also making that the intention and creating the space for it.
And I think I think Selenia said something really interesting the other day, because we were talking through this like term of data driven, and one of the things she said was that she doesn't think that we're data driven, we're data informed. And I think that that's a really interesting distinction, because we're not necessarily just getting data for data's sake. Like, we're not collectors of data. We really want to use data to inform how we think about our customers, our product, the direction our company is going in. And so I think that that's just like a little bit of semantics, but I think that it helps to kind of contextualize how we're thinking about this, is that we're using that as like part of this ecosystem of how we're thinking about things and how we're trying to validate or disprove ideas and thoughts that we have.
Yeah, and I can expand on that if you want me to, Asim, but if you have another question, we can go to that.
We will come back to that. I think the key takeaway for me was, number one, curiosity, and number two, I also get the sense that the tone is being set top down somewhat, the where being data informed is more important than just having an opinion and being right. Like, that is the culture in many organizations. So let me double click on that data-driven piece a little bit. So obviously, from a Selenia, what struck me in the last conversation we had is the amount of infrastructure that you guys have put in place. I recall a statistic you shared that there's 16 different applications that are feeding into your data warehouse that you're using to generate signals on what's really going on with your account base. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. Like, what kinds of signals, what kind of data, what kind of apps, what kind of infrastructure?
Yeah.
Just to share with the audience a little bit of the complexity that kind of goes into something like this.
Yeah, I think like any good startup, everyone has good intentions at the beginning, and they stand up all these apps and all these tables. And we found ourselves at a place maybe about a year ago where our marketing team was like, we really want to know where our leads are coming from. We really want to know how they're getting into Salesforce. Like, is the Zoom info correct? And I didn't lead this charge. We have another person, his name is Ben, and he's fabulous. But he kind of led the charge of making sure that that data was flowing correctly in Salesforce and ZoomInfo and all these, and HubSpot, and there's a few other tools that they use. But being able to create almost like a profile of the customer before they even become users of our products, to understand their use cases and who they are as people. And so for us on the data side, we have to make sure that we're mapping that information to once they actually become users, because we have to take all of that into context when we're helping them make decisions. It isn't just, hey, you're now a customer, forget how you got here. We have to remember why they came to us to begin with and understand what problems they were looking to solve with our product, and see, hey, does the data support that we're solving that problem for you? And that's really where Hannah comes in. And it could be real easy for me to say as a product manager, I don't have to think about that. Just tell me the metrics you want. But it's really important for me to understand what type of questions Hannah's team wants to answer, what type of questions our marketing team wants to answer, so we can build those pipelines out right. And they make sense when we produce a final report that's going to inform us on how people are performing in their accounts.
That's great. And Hannah, from your perspective, you know, what I like, Selena mentioned this customer profile, right? So you and your team that you support interact with customers all the time. How do you leverage that customer profile? How do you, what signals do you look for in the data that help you make decisions on how to engage with your business users and then their customers?
Yeah, I think this is actually something that we're really like working to grow into as well. So we've been spending a lot of time like really deep diving into our customer journey and understanding like, how do we make sure that we don't have metrics that are siloed within specific stages of the journey? And then also, how do we make sure that like we're working from the lead that comes in all the way through the advocacy phase, that all of us that touch that have metrics that we can impact from the beginning to the end, so that we're not all focused on like, cool, we're in sales, we just got to get this customer through the door. What we want to focus on is how do we make sure that we are tied to the most valuable customers, where we can solve the problems that they are really attached to. And so we've been kind of growing this in a multitude of ways, where we have more like subjective data that we're bringing in from sales to CS. Then we also have more objective data, like Selenia was talking about, like from ZoomInfo or like Sales Navigator, things like that, where we're getting that information and then we're understanding as like our contacts move through their journey, as the account moves through their journey, how do we make sure that all of that data is kind of harmonizing together in order to understand, how do the individuals using it that roll up to this account, how do we measure how they're doing? And then how do we use that data to drive the actions that we need in order to impact that journey down the line? So I think like Selenia and I talk a lot about that, like, in my humble opinion, like data should always be accompanied by an action. So like, let's make sure that we're providing data to our team that they understand, cool, when I see this thing, here are the things that I should be doing with it, and making sure that we're having be too noisy.
Got it. So, one of the common issues that we see when we talk to teams, and you'll be surprised, or maybe not, but in meetings where we have the product person or the data person that provides the data, and then the business user or the ops person that consumes the data in the same conversation, basically going at each other and saying, hey, I'm looking for this kind of data. And the other person saying, yeah, but you already have it. And, there's almost like talking past each other. Like, that's not unusual. And the reason is understandable, because often the data person doesn't have context for the business user, and the business person isn't usually SQL savvy to be able to tease out the answers they need. And so they're kind of talking past each other a little bit. Does that happen with the both of you? Or, how do you overcome that?
Do you want me to do it, Hannah?
Yeah, we're trying to create drama, but we're having a hard time doing it.
Yes. Well, we have a hot take on this. I think the reason Hannah and I, and even like our sales team, when they do ask for data, we don't have this. It's because we have mutual respect for each other's experience and expertise. I know that Hannah knows things about our customers that I would never know, even by looking at all of their behavioral data. I mean, there's just no way. But Hannah also knows that I know things because I have access to the data that she wouldn't know. When we talk to our sales reps, same exact thing. They have context neither of us have. And so I think coming into those conversations with that understanding of, I have something to teach this person, but I also have something to learn from this person, makes a big difference, because the moment you become insulated in what you do know, you miss out on actually helping the customer, because you're more worried about, again, looking like you have all the answers. And I think for us, just going into it without any real bias of, I know better because I have this data point. And that goes back to like the data informed thing. You are aware of a data point, you're aware of something that happened, but someone else may have a piece of context that you're missing that could really fill in that picture for you and just make you more successful in solving the problem for the end user.
Got it. I'd love to hear, Hannah, your perspective as well.
I think that, like, in reality, I think that a lot of this comes down to, again, like curiosity. I think that neither of us really have an ego around being right. Like, in reality, to me, like, we are just here to like ask a bunch of questions and figure out a bunch of things. And so thinking about data, like when my team asks about a data point or has curiosity about specific things, or I ask Selenia about something, we usually don't come back with a binary answer, which I could, like, our team is not here, but maybe that is frustrating. But we come back and we ask a bunch of questions like, oh my gosh, tell me more about this. Okay. Yeah. So what would you do with it? When would you use it? How would you leverage it? Awesome. What other things? Like, it's just more of this process of curiosity and not thinking of it as a request, more of like an opening of like we had this discussion the other day where one of our CSMs was looking for specific data sets, and Selenia and I are in a data channel together, and the CSM asked for it. And I'm like, Selenia asked a question, Hannah asked a question, Selenia asked a question, Hannah asked a question. And in the end, it turned out that we actually had a lot of this data, but they were looking to leverage it in a different way. And so then we're curious on, oh, interesting. I wonder, do you leverage data that way with a lot of customers? Would this be something really valuable to you? So it's less of this, like, we don't talk at each other, we talk with each other. And then Selenia and I are literally here to solve the same problem. Like, overall, everyone that works in Spekit, we're here to solve the same problem. And so it's not like an us versus them thing.
That's very helpful. And I think, look, I think having mutual respect and curiosity, and then asking the right questions to understand what the data is trying to tell you, I think that all makes sense. And Hannah, I would direct this question more towards you. Like, where does the human intuition or judgment come into this, right? So like, you obviously interact with the CS teams and customers. And so you have that additional sort of perspective of what you're seeing, over time with how customers are using your product, what are they doing in your product, what kind of challenges they see, and what kind of upside they see. So how do you bring that sort of view into understanding the data?
Yeah, I really think of myself as more like somebody that is basically like helping to synthesize kind of these more individual things. So like, each of our CSM works with a specific segment. They have a certain type of customer they're trying to serve. And within this like holistic customer that we're also looking at. And so for me, I'm consistently trying to understand, like, we're not a huge team. We are a startup. So we have to be really resourceful in how we do things. So like, when a request comes in, when we're trying to get curious about things, how do we make sure when we're solving one problem, we're also solving 12? So what is that common thread that we can bring in, that when we are going to, let's say, create a new dashboard or surface a new data point, let's think about how we make that data point actually meet a lot more needs than that single one. And so like, even when questions or requests from customers come up, we're always trying to figure out, like, how do we make this the most efficient for all of us? And that also is like that balance between moving fast and moving slow, of like thinking about this a little bit more critically, asking those questions, getting that insight, so that you aren't just solving one-off problems continually.
Yeah, got it. I'm gonna maybe take the conversation in a slightly unexpected direction here because not to put either of you on the spot, I'm curious on your point of view because Hannah, the way you describe the interaction that happens between people that are asking for data and the people that are providing the insights, it almost reminds me of like a chat GPT like experience, right? Like if you guys have tried that out, it's almost like, you ask a question, then it gives you a response, and then you ask another question related to the previous response, and it keeps going. How do you see technologies like that sort of impacting organizations in the longer run? Selenia, maybe more from your perspective, I'm curious to hear, like, as a business user, the value of it is very clear to me, but as a technologist, how do you think about that? Like, how do you see that impacts organizations long term? Are you thinking about that today?
Yeah, so it's funny because we have a saying at Spekit, context is queen. Again, we're a female founded company, so keep that in mind.
That's awesome. That's
think,
going on our LinkedIn channel, context is queen.
But it goes into this, right? Like a model, an AI model will literally just repeat anything it's been taught to say. And with a lot of what we do, we have to have those different pieces of context to formulate a good answer or a better solution. And I think there was still a long way from being able to be there where a company doesn't need a data product manager, doesn't need a CSM operation person, because there are just these little nuances that we haven't built into a model yet. We have to, one, register them ourselves and understand, hey, this is how our users use our product, this is who they are. And then again, like that context really helps us understand what data do we surface, what data do we share. And like Hannah used an example where we're like, oh, we already have that data set here. You don't have to get it from anywhere else. And we jokingly call ourselves the recycling queens because we'll say that like, oh, the question you want to answer can be answered with this data set. What you were looking at may actually create more confusion because it's not directly correlated to the thing you're trying to measure. And so I think those little nuances that bring humanity to answering the data questions can't be replaced just yet. Maybe one day they will, but we're still very far from it because it requires two of our brains to come together and say, this is how we solve it. So
Got it. Okay, cool. And so as we're actually just a quick reminder for all of our participants, if you have questions of either Hannah or Selenia, please feel free to ask, drop it in the webinar chat, and I'll make sure to bring it up here. But this is your opportunity to ask questions throughout, and we welcome that kind of interaction. Okay, so until we see more questions, I'm going to keep going because I'm loving this conversation. There's so much interesting things to learn from this. I think the next sort of part that I'm curious about, and Selenia, I'm going to stay with you for a moment, is, data teams are typically centralized and support the entire organization. And I think that was kind of the impression I took away from our last discussions, how you're set up as well. So how do you make sure that, balancing different priorities across the team and making sure that the CS team gets what they're looking for while you're serving other parts of the organization? How do you go about approaching that problem of juggling resources?
Yes, that's a really great question, because I think it comes down to self-awareness as a whole. Depending on where you are as a company, you can be a very young startup, you can be a more mature company, it's been around for like 20 years. You're going to have different data needs at that point in time. And us being self-aware, like we know our goal right now is to make people love Spekit even more. So when a data request comes in or an ask for a data set comes in, we have to think about, does this meet our current goal? Or is it something that we can do further in the future when we want to optimize the scale or whatever goal we decide in the future? So just being self-aware of what your actual goal is today helps us filter through a lot of that. And again, like we're the recycle queens, we're real quick to say, okay, well, you can answer that with something that's already available, and we can help you create that story. And I think that really mitigates a lot of the incoming requests that go to our team, because then we don't have to worry about actually asking our one data engineer, because we're very scrappy and we only have one, for him to go and run this query. It's no, we already have that. Let's just curate the right story with it.
Got it. That's great. And I guess, Hannah, from your perspective, like I heard the mention of a data channel earlier, right? So is that, I'm curious, like what are some of the ways in which you communicate these types of questions internally? Like what tools can people think of? Is it Slack channels? Is it, like you mentioned, recycle queen a couple times? Is it, some place where people can go look up previous queries and responses? Like how do you operationalize this? I guess that's the question. And I'd love to hear, Hannah, from your perspective first, because you're the consumer and you're sort of supporting the team that consumes this data. So how do you help operationalize these? What are some of the tools that you use to do that?
Yeah,
Is this a plug for Spekit?
I know, right? So we have this tool called Spekit. We currently, when we're looking, like anyone in the company is looking for a specific data set, we have a data request channel, and all of us are pretty active in it. And so I monitor that when a CSM comes in and looks for data. And I'm always, again, curious on when that happens, but I also find it really beneficial because I can get more like bigger company-wide context on what we're looking for across sales, across marketing, in a lot of different areas. And for our CS team, we primarily, I would say, like ingest our data in a few different ways. We have an internal CSP platform, which is Catalyst. So they're looking at either at an aggregate or an account level, the data, the activation, the adoption, how we're multi-threaded in those accounts, what the use cases look like. They're using that. And then we also use Xflow in order to surface data externally to our customers through different types of dashboards. And so one of the things I think that like Selenia and I are super aligned on, which comes back to this like recycling thing, is that in a lot of ways, simplicity is a really important approach to data. And so when we first kind of went and started this process, like we said, we didn't have a ton of data. And we kind of got into this point where I feel like we're like in a data landfill, like there's data everywhere. And so what we're really working on is understanding like, what are the highest value data points that we can share? What is the story that we are telling with those points of data? And then how do we continue to get our team to come back to like, oh yeah, you're trying to ask that question. Remember when we were talking about activation? Remember when we were talking about, we have this new feature where we're looking at, we support content. So we're looking at, is content fresh or stale? Remember when we were talking about, this is actually a great way to use that point. And so I think we're continually just trying to make sure that like what we are providing is really simple and digestible for our team, and they understand the actions behind it. And then again, getting curious when we get questions that may be outside of what we're thinking about. How do we chase that down? How do we think about it? What do we do? And not just solving that one problem that's right in front of us all the time, thinking about it as the whole picture of what we're trying to curate together.
Got it. Got it. Anything you'd like to add to that, Selenia, from your perspective?
Yeah, I will say the benefit of the Slack channel is that everyone in the company can see it. And sometimes I don't even have to answer, or no one on my team or Hannah, like they will answer for each other. Oh, you can get this here. And I think that's one of the things that we've done really well. We haven't made data into like this one-way street. It's more of like a farmer's market, like it's available for anyone and everyone, and you can exchange and talk to each other about it. And if you still don't understand it, we'll answer the questions, we'll help you through it. But it isn't hidden from anyone. Like if it's in Catalyst, because we use that for our CSM team, they all have the same access. If it's in a dashboard that we put in, everyone can also see it. And I think more of the questions that we get tend to be around shared data literacy understanding of, how did we define activation? How did we define our daily active user? And those are pretty easy to answer, but I don't think we have a whole lot of nuanced questions just because of the community we've built around data. It isn't just one person has all the answers.
Yeah, got it. I'm actually going to follow up with a question that Nina just asked, which I think is very pertinent to the discussion we're having right now, which is, when data isn't always complete, sometimes it's disconnected, there's conflict in the data itself. How do you handle those kinds of decisions? How do you handle those kinds of scenarios? Is there an example that you might be able to share?
We have examples.
So again, this is a very important one because we've been talking a lot about engagement and just product adoption. And like once people get into Spekit, how do we make sure that they fall in love with our product? And again, because we're a very young company, when we set up the product, we didn't set up all of the tracking events. So we have parts of the story of user did X task or user completed this action, but we may not know where they did it, if it was in the extension or the web app. And so when Hannah and I are digging into this, or even anyone else in our team, we have to use supporting data points to create that full picture. And I mean, we've done that a lot with activation. You know, it was very early on. How do we define what activation is? And like Hannah and I have an ideal state of what that should be, but our data can't support us because we didn't set up certain tracking events. So we're like, okay, what do we know? And I think this is where you can leverage that humanity of understanding you have a gut feeling about something and let the data either tell you you're wrong or tell you that you're right. And then you can follow a new direction. But I think people get stuck when they believe something and they try to find evidence to support that instead of letting the evidence show you that's not the right path you want to follow. Like maybe you should follow this one. So find your supporting cast members in those data sets when you don't have a complete main character.
Yeah, I smiled really wide when you said, you know, when business users kind of have a gut feeling about it, and then they want to look into the data. And the reason I say that is because my co-founder Aman talks about this notion of gut data gut all the time.
Yes.
Which is you can't just rely on one or the other. It is an iterative process where you form an opinion, you see the data, you sort of validate or what was the opposite of validate the data and or the opinion, and then you form a new opinion, right? So you're constantly sort of going this gut data gut process, and I hear a little bit of that, you know, reflected back in what you just shared. Hannah, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think one thing that like we continue to come back to is that we get lots of questions because we are surfacing data in different ways for different users at different times. And so one of the things that Selenia and I are super focused on right now is making sure, just like she was talking about with data literacy, how do we ensure that what we are sharing is well contextualized for our team? And then like, how do we make sure that we aren't querying data a certain way in one platform as compared to how we're doing it in another platform? And so that's something that like we're really working on, is that like when you get a specific definition, for example, activation, that way that we calculate and talk about activation will be consistent across everything we look at, so that the end user, our CSM, our customer, sales, whomever, can feel competent in what they are looking at and talking about, just like we do. And that's something that I think is just like a big moment that we're in right now, is making sure that we have that data literacy and accuracy in how we define things.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't answer the second part of the question of conflicting data, because that has happened to us too. Yep. I would encourage you to challenge it, get curious with it, not even in an offensive way, just literally like, how was this calculated? What is the time frame you're looking at? Who is included in this? Because Hannah and I have found that sometimes we're thinking about a metric, and when we dig into the calculation, we're looking at a complete different segment of users. And it's like, oh, okay, well, if I slice my data the same way you did, I do get the same number. Or if I, start from this table versus another one, it does change that percentage a little bit. So I think just being very curious again of like, how was this defined? Who defined it? Because that may also make a big difference too, depending on the answer they were seeking.
Got it. That's an amazing response. Thank you both. I have a question here from Sawyer Ramsey, which I'm going to read out. It's in the Q&A session, a Q&A channel, not the chat channel. But the first thing he says is, it's incredible to see this level of collaboration between CS and data. Which is why we're talking to you today, because I saw the same thing when we first connected with you. And understand that your team is reactively tracking customer journey to better understand the why, but are you also looking at a kind of a proactive approach to say, what challenges are your customers seeing in that you can identify through the data, and are you trying to come up with some solutions to support those challenges? So maybe talk a little bit about, what does the future look like, or the future looking view look like from what you can glean out of the data? I
feel like this is like where my dream state is right now, like where like I sit and I'm like, oh, I think customer journeys are amazing. And in my brain, a customer journey should be a way that we can proactively predict how to drive success. So yes, we are going to look at, maybe for a CSM, like they're going to have some lagging indicators, like whether that be activation or license utilization or how engaged they might be with that CSM. We're going to have those things. But I think what we're kind of maturing into right now is how do we provide, let's say, like a prospect with the information that is going to make them thirsty for when they get to that like implementation phase. And so what things can we test as a team to understand, like, hey, when we do X with our prospects, when they get to implementation, we are seeing that they are actually moving through implementation 20% faster than other customers. And I think that for us, we're young, we're scrappy, and we like to experiment. So like, we want to ask these questions, we want to try different things, and we want to fail. And I think that like, it's okay to try something and be like, oh, okay. Maybe that wasn't it, and come back to it. But I think that ideally, like, your customer journey is both like provides lagging indicators, but also provides you that like excitement to be able to predict and try different things too.
Yeah, and great response. And for Sawyer, if you're, if you have similar sort of need in terms of asking questions and figuring out how is your customer moving relative to their cohort or relative to their prior, history, et cetera, there's a tool that does that. I'm pointing to the left of my head. Check us out and talk to us if we can help in any way. I'm going to take this to a close in the next few minutes, and I'm going to invite any final questions from the audience to ask of the both of you. I think the question I'd have for you is, if a company is thinking about setting up this today, where there's data-driven responses to running your business and particularly your customer-facing business, what are some of the pitfalls that they should avoid in that journey? Because people, I'm sure you've experienced situations where you've said, oh, I wish looking back, we had done this differently. What would be some examples of that, either from a business perspective or from a product/data perspective? What would you bring up?
I recently learned that there's a term for what Hannah and I do, so I'm going to use it. It's called dream mapping. And apparently you define what your end state ideal universe is. And that's basically what we did. We said, in a perfect world, what do we want the data to do at Spekit? And you have the obvious answers like self-serve, make sure it's accessible. But then when we got very prescriptive about it, we realized we didn't just want people to self-serve. We wanted them to find their own understanding of the value Spekit was bringing them. And also, are your users finding that value? And if not, this is how you can help them. So bringing some more insights beyond just the data point itself. So identifying that vision, that end dream state, and then working backwards from there. Here's the data that I have that could potentially help me decide if that's the direction, if it'll take me in that direction, or do I need to do some more work? And I think for us early on, because we didn't have any data, we were so hungry for everything. We're like, just open the floodgates. And then we kind of had to reset and say, I know what is our end goal here? Like, where do we want to go? Oh, well, we want people to understand how to use our product at different stages in their life cycle with us. Okay, so let's think about what those actions may be. How do we calculate them? And I think that framework really helped us, because instead we could have just been giving everyone everything and ended up creating more confusion for both our clients and our internal Spekit people.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I have a personal passion for data. And so I think that there's just this reality that when you think about building out a data team, when you think about building even just like your company in general, I think that data can put people in really binary situations. And in reality, you can use data to answer all your questions in two different ways. And so I think there's this reality of like bringing people in, and I think, like, not to toot our own horn, but I think Selenia and I are really good about this, of the data is not necessarily the end goal. And that our end goal, like she was saying, is to build Spekit love. That is what our end goal is. And so we approach data in more of this fluid way. And I think at the beginning of the conversation, you were saying like, you know, CS is about relationships, not really about data. In my mind, actually relationships and data are the same.
Mhm.
And so making sure that like we all are able to apply the value that data can bring to our own roles, to our company, to everything that we do, but also being super conscious and aware of the fact that like data is used in order to validate a lot of the times your own assumptions. And so I think that for Selenia and I, we're not looking for validation. We're looking for the ability to continue on kind of this journey of getting better. And we're going to do things where we might measure something one way to start, and it doesn't work 6 months down the road. And to me, I don't see that as like a wrong turn or a failure. I see that as like, we would have never figured out that we didn't want to do it that way had we not done it this way before. So just embracing that, like, there's a huge maturity curve when it comes to data. There's a lot of growth, and that there probably isn't a wrong turn, but you just have to keep going. Like you can't just stop and be like, this is it. This is the golden ticket, because it's not.
Yeah, and I'll add something Hannah and I just kind of had like an aha moment last week about this. We don't ever look at data as bad or good. Like even if we were looking at our activation number and it was not where we wanted, it was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, let's dig into that a little bit more. So it's really easy to treat data in a binary form of like, it's either good or bad, but instead let it be more of a flag. Is this what you want to pursue, or do you want to look at the inverse, or do you want to question it and figure out how it's being calculated? And I think if you can avoid that pitfall of looking at numbers as good or bad and more objectively, you're going to be more successful.
This has been an awesome conversation. I really want to thank both of you for being here today. You know, I've learned so much, and I hope the audience did too. If you have any additional questions for Hannah or Selenia, what's the best way for them to find you? Is there a LinkedIn thing that you want to drop into the chat session?
No,
Sure.
we can throw our LinkedIn in, and we're both very, obviously we're both relatively nice. So
I don't know. I'm still trying to decide that. No, of course you are.
I'm happy to have any conversations with anyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the audience for joining us today. If you have any additional questions for Hannah or Selenia, you can definitely reach out to them on LinkedIn. If you have any questions for us at Immersa and how we might be able to help, you can find me at asim@immersa.co. You can also find me on LinkedIn. We will share a recording of this conversation with you shortly after, so watch out for that. Share it with your friends and colleagues and promote it far and wide. This has been a unique conversation from my perspective, in that we have a data team and a CS team that actually gets along, and not just gets along, but I applaud the culture that you've created in your organization, to where it's all curiosity driven, and it's focusing on simplicity and asking the right questions, and sort of this gut approach. It's rare to find this kind of collaboration in the industry, and you guys are building something special. We're fans, and we want to continue to promote that. So thank you for joining us today, and please stay on for a couple more moments as the audience drops off, so we can chat some more. Thanks, everyone.